This 21-year-old nanny started caring for a wheelchair-bound boy, the son of a millionaire, but 6 months later, she became pregnant. When the millionaire found out who the father was, he was shocked and took drastic measures. Comment what you think will happen and subscribe to my channel to support my work. The cab pulled up in front of the imposing mansion in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. Sarah took a deep breath, clutching her worn purse against her chest as she gazed at the wrought iron gates. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, despite the chilly June breeze, but from nerves. It was her first job interview since arriving in the city 3 months ago. "That'll be $53, miss," the cab driver said, interrupting her thoughts. Sarah rummaged in her wallet, counting her last few bills. It was her savings from the odd jobs she'd managed to get since leaving upstate. After paying the fare, she only had a few coins left. The intercom buzzed twice before a female voice answered. "Aguiar Residence. Good morning, my name is Sarah Miller. I have an interview scheduled with Mr. Noah Aguiar." The gates opened with a metallic clang. Sarah walked through the manicured garden, noticing the rose bushes pruned with almost mathematical precision. Everything there exuded a cold order, an artificial perfection that made her heart clench for reasons she didn't yet understand. The housekeeper, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Mercedes, greeted her at the door. Her eyes scanned Sarah's simple appearance, the modest navy dress, the clean but worn flats, the neat bun in her brown hair. "Mr. Aguiar is in his study. Please follow me," she said dryly, leading her through the mansion's hallways. As she walked, Sarah noticed the oppressive silence that hung over the house. It was a dense, almost palpable silence, as if the walls themselves held painful secrets. There were no children's laughter, no voices, no natural sounds of an inhabited home, only the echo of her own footsteps on the marble floor. The study was a large room, decorated with dark, heavy furniture. Behind a mahogany desk, Noah Aguiar looked up from the papers he was reading. He was a tall, elegant man, appearing to be in his 40s. But it was his eyes that caught Sarah's attention. Empty eyes, like the windows of an abandoned house. "Have a seat," he indicated the chair in front of him without getting up. "Did you bring your documents?" Sarah nodded, taking a folder with her certificates from her purse. Her hands still trembled slightly as he examined the papers in silence. 21 years old, graduated as a nurse 6 months ago, he read aloud. "Why did you leave upstate?" The question caught her off guard. Sarah felt her stomach clench. How could she explain that she had run away? How could she say that she couldn't bear the looks of pity, the whispers in the corners, the weight of abandonment that suffocated her in her hometown? "I'm looking for better opportunities," she replied simply. Noah studied her for a few moments, as if he could see through her rehearsed answer. "The job is to care for my son, Alex. He's 7 years old and has special needs." Sarah noticed the hesitation in his voice when mentioning his son. There was something there, a contained pain that she recognized immediately. It was the same kind of pain she carried inside herself. "Can I meet him?" she asked softly. Noah seemed surprised by the request. His hardened face twitched for a moment, as if he were fighting an internal battle. "Come with me," he said finally, rising to his feet. They went up to the second floor, in silence. The hallway was long, with several closed doors. They stopped in front of the last one. Noah hesitated with his hand on the doorknob. "Alex, he doesn't talk much. Since the accident," his voice failed. 2 years ago, he and his mother, only he survived." Before Sarah could process the information, the door opened. The room was large and bright, filled with expensive toys that seemed never to have been used. Near the window, in a wheelchair, sat Alex. The boy didn't turn around when they entered. He continued looking through the glass, as if the world outside was more real than the people in his room. Sarah felt her heart break at the sight of the lonely little figure, so lost in his own silence. "Alex!" Noah called, his voice betraying a mixture of love and helplessness. "This is Sarah. She came to meet us." The boy remained still. Sarah approached slowly, kneeling beside the wheelchair to be at his eye level. She said nothing. She just waited, respecting his space and his time. After a few minutes that seemed like an eternity, Alex turned his head slightly. His eyes, the same, dark brown as his father's, met hers. They were old eyes in such a young face, burdened with a sadness that no child should know. "Hi, Alex," she said softly, with a gentle smile. "It's a beautiful day today, isn't it? You can see the clouds making pictures in the sky." For a very brief moment, something flickered in the boy's gaze. A spark of interest, perhaps. But it soon faded, and he turned back to look out the window. From the doorway, Noah watched the scene with an indescribable expression. When Sarah stood up, he had already recomposed his mask of coldness. "The salary is good. You'll have Sundays off. Can you start tomorrow?" Sarah looked once more at Alex, at that silent loneliness that cried out for help. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "I can start tomorrow." As she walked down the stairs to leave, Sarah felt the weight of that house on her shoulders. It was a beautiful place, rich in material comfort, but so poor in human warmth that it hurt. How did that man and that boy survive there, trapped in their unspoken pains? On the street, waiting for the bus that would take her back to her rented room, Sarah looked once more at the mansion. Behind one of the windows on the second floor, a small silhouette watched. Her heart clenched. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Sarah cried. She cried for Alex, for his father, for all the losses that life imposes without asking permission. But mostly, she cried because she recognized in that house the same loneliness she carried inside herself. Tomorrow would be a new day, and maybe, just maybe, she could make a difference in the life of that silent boy who looked at the world through the window. The first month at the Aguiar mansion passed in a blur of silent routines and cautious glances. Sarah arrived punctually, at 7 in the morning, when the sun had barely risen. She always found Noah in the same place, sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of untouched black coffee in front of him, eyes lost in thoughts he never shared. "Good morning, Mr. Aguiar," she greeted softly, receiving only a distracted nod in response. It was as if he was always somewhere else, even when physically present. The first week was the hardest. Alex refused to look at her, turning his wheelchair to the window whenever she entered the room. Sarah didn't force an approach. She limited herself to caring for him gently, bathing, changing clothes, meals, all in silence, respecting his time. One particularly cold morning, as she helped him get dressed, Sarah began to hum softly an old lullaby that her grandmother used to sing. Alex's small hands, always tense, relaxed imperceptibly. "My mom used to sing that song," he said suddenly, his voice hoarse from disuse. They were the first words he had addressed to her since her arrival. Sarah felt her heart race, but kept her voice calm. "It's a pretty song, isn't it? My grandma sang it to me when I was little." "Where's your grandma now?" he asked, still without looking at her. The innocent question hit Sarah like a punch in the stomach. Painful memories flooded her mind. The modest funeral, the withered flowers on the simple coffin, the feeling of total abandonment when the last person who really loved her left this world. "She's in heaven," she replied simply, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Together with your mother." For the first time, Alex turned his head and looked her in the eyes. There was something different in his gaze, a glimmer of recognition perhaps, as if he had found someone who understood his pain. From that day on, something changed subtly. Alex began to accept her presence. He didn't talk much, but he no longer shut himself off completely. Sometimes he allowed her to read stories to him. On other occasions, he let her take him for walks in the garden. It was during one of these walks that Sarah discovered the boy's talent for drawing. His small hands created entire worlds on paper, colorful landscapes, fantastic animals, smiling people. It was as if, through the drawings, he could express everything that his words couldn't say. "They're beautiful, Alex," she praised sincerely, watching a particularly detailed drawing of a family. "Who are they?" The boy hesitated, his fingers tightening around the pencil. "It's how I remember before." Sarah felt a pang in her chest as she noticed the three figures on the paper: a tall man, a woman with long hair, and a boy standing between them. It was how Alex saw himself in his memories, before the accident that put him in the wheelchair and took his mother. That night, after Alex was asleep, Sarah found Noah in the hallway. He seemed more downcast than usual, the deep circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. "Mr. Aguiar," she called softly, "Alex has a gift for drawing. Maybe it would be good to encourage him." Noah stopped, turning slowly to her. His eyes, normally distant, focused on her with a disturbing intensity. "He hasn't drawn since the accident. He drew today," she continued, extending the paper carefully. "I think he's trying to process everything in his own way." Noah took the drawing with trembling hands. His face, always so controlled, contorted in an expression of deep pain as he recognized the figures on the paper. For a moment it seemed he was going to say something, but then his mask of indifference returned to its place, and he simply returned the drawing without comment. Later, alone in her rented room, Sarah cried again. She cried for Alex, trapped in his painful memories. She cried for Noah, so lost in his own suffering that he couldn't reach his son. And she cried for herself, for all the times she also wanted to draw her own family and realize she had no one left to put on paper. The weeks turned into months. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, small changes began to happen in the silent mansion. Alex began to smile occasionally, shy, hesitant smiles, like the sun trying to break through heavy clouds. His drawings, previously dominated by dark colors, began to gain more vibrant tones. One particularly significant afternoon, he asked to go to the kitchen. It was the first time he had shown interest in leaving the room of his own accord. Mrs. Mercedes, the always serious housekeeper, couldn't hide her surprise at seeing him there. "Can I make a snack?" he asked quietly, and Sarah noticed the housekeeper's hands trembling slightly as she prepared a sandwich. It was on this day that Sarah first heard the most precious sound in the world, Alex's laughter. It happened when she, trying to reach a jar on the high shelf, knocked flour all over herself, becoming completely white. His laughter, though brief, filled the kitchen with a long-forgotten joy. Noah, who was passing through the hallway at that moment, stopped abruptly when he heard the sound. His face registered a complex mixture of emotions: surprise, joy, fear, and something else. Something that Sarah couldn't identify. But not everything was progress. There were days when Alex shut down again, refusing to talk or get out of bed. Days when the weight of his mother's absence seemed to crush his little heart. In these moments, Sarah just sat beside him, in silence, offering her presence as a safe haven in the storm of his emotions. One of these difficult mornings, while helping Alex with his bath, she noticed the scars on his back, physical marks of the accident that had changed his life forever. Her heart ached, thinking about how much suffering that little body had already endured. "Sometimes," he whispered almost inaudibly, "I dream that I can run again, that Mom is waiting for me in the park, like before." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes, but kept her voice steady. "Your mom will always be with you, Alex. Here," she touched his heart gently, "and in your beautiful drawings." It was on this night that something unexpected happened. As she prepared to leave, Sarah found Noah in his study, standing before the window, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. "He smiled today," Noah said without turning around. "Twice." "Yes," she replied softly. "He's starting to open up." "Why?" The question came out as an anguished whisper. "Why can he do it with you and with me?" The sentence hung in the air, laden with pain and guilt. Sarah took a step towards him, feeling the weight of that unfinished confession. "Mr. Aguiar," she began carefully, "sometimes it's easier to open up with someone who also carries scars similar to our own." He turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers, with an intensity that made her hold her breath. For a moment, it seemed he was going to say something more, but then the phone rang, breaking the moment of vulnerability. Sarah left the study with a heavy heart, knowing she had touched on something deep and painful. As she walked to the bus stop, she thought about how that family was beginning to mean much more to her than just a job. What she didn't know, as she returned to her lonely room that night, was that her own scars would soon be exposed in a way that would change everything. Fate, in its mysterious wisdom, was setting the stage for revelations that would shake the foundations of that house and the hearts that dwelled within it. Autumn arrived, bringing with it cold winds and memories that Sarah struggled to keep buried. It had been exactly 1 year since she had left her hometown, fleeing accusatory stares and malicious whispers. The date weighed on her chest like lead, but she tried hard not to show it. On that particular morning, she arrived at the Aguiar mansion earlier than usual. The sky was still dark, and a fine drizzle was falling on the city. She found Noah in the kitchen, as always, but something was different. He was holding an old photograph, his gaze lost in distant memories. "It's been 3 years today," he said without looking up, his voice hoarse as if it hadn't been used in days. 3 years. Since the accident, Sarah felt her heart clench. Now she understood why Alex had been more restless in recent days, why his drawings had darkened again. The anniversary of the accident that changed their lives forever was approaching, and the weight of that memory was almost palpable in the air. "Clara loved days like this," Noah continued, still looking at the photo. "She said the rain washed the soul." It was the first time he had mentioned his wife's name. Sarah remained silent, respecting that rare moment of vulnerability. She was taking Alex to swimming lessons. The words came out as if they hurt. "I should have gone. It was my turn, but I had an important meeting. I always had an important meeting." His hands trembled slightly as he placed the photograph on the table. Sarah could see the image, a beautiful woman with brown hair smiling. At the camera, hugging a younger Alex, both wearing swimsuits by a pool. "The driver lost control on the curve," Noah continued, his voice getting lower and lower. "Clara, she shielded Alex with her own body. When the paramedics arrived..." He couldn't finish the sentence. His hands covered his face now, his shoulders, shaking with suppressed sobs. Sarah felt her own tears streaming down. Without thinking, she placed a hand on his shoulder, offering silent comfort. To her surprise, Noah didn't pull away. They stayed like that for long minutes, united in shared pain, until footsteps in the hallway made them separate abruptly. Mrs. Mercedes entered the kitchen, her normally stern face softened by an old sadness. "The boy is awake," she announced, softly. "He's calling for you, Sarah." In the room, Alex was sitting in his wheelchair, looking out the window at the falling rain. On his desk, a new drawing. A woman with long hair held the hand of a small boy. Both figures were made entirely in shades of blue. "Mom liked blue," he said when Sarah approached. "She said it was the color of the sky after the storm." Sarah knelt beside him, noticing the silent tears streaming down his small face. Gently, she took his hand. "You know, Alex," she began softly, "they say that the people we love never really leave us. They live in our memories, in the colors we choose, in the stories we tell. The boy turned to her, his big eyes filled with a sadness too old for his age. Did you lose someone too? The question hit Sarah like a punch in the stomach. Images that she was desperately trying to forget flooded her mind. Her grandmother withering away in a hospital bed, the abandonment by her parents when she was just a baby, the suffocating loneliness that had haunted her ever since. Yes, she replied in a trembling voice. My grandma. She was all I had. Does it hurt a lot? Asked Alex, his small voice laden with painful understanding. Sometimes, she admitted. But you know what helps? Remembering the happy times, like when she sang that song to me, or when she made chocolate chip cookies on rainy days. Alex's eyes lit up slightly. Mom made hot chocolate when it rained, with marshmallows. How about we make hot chocolate today? Suggested Sarah. We can try to make it the way your mom used to. And for the first time that morning, a small smile appeared on Alex's face. In the kitchen, with Mrs. Mercedes's help, they prepared the chocolate. The sweet aroma filled the house, bringing a little warmth to that grey day. Noah found them like that. Sarah and Alex at the kitchen table, steaming mugs in front of them, the boy trying to explain exactly how his mother used to make the chocolate. For a moment, he stood in the doorway, watching the scene with an indescribable expression. Dad, called Alex, noticing his presence. Want to have hot chocolate with us? It's just like Mom's. The innocent invitation seemed to pierce the many layers of protection that Noah had built around himself. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly approached the table. Your mother always put cinnamon in it, he said softly, sitting down. She said it was her special touch. I remember, exclaimed Alex, his eyes shining, and she drew faces with whipped cream on top. Sarah watched father and son sharing memories for the first time, her own heart clenching with a mixture of joy and sadness. It was as if, at that moment, a small crack had opened in the wall of silence that separated them. The afternoon passed, like that, with stories about Clara emerging little by little, each memory like a small light in the darkness that had enveloped that family for so long. Alex laughed a few times, a precious sound that made Noah's eyes shine in a different way. But for Sarah, each moment of shared joy was also a stab of guilt. The closer she got to that family, the heavier the secret she carried became. How could she continue there, building bonds of trust, knowing that her own past threatened to destroy everything? At night, in her rented room, Sarah couldn't sleep. The memories she tried so hard to forget haunted her more strongly. Uerten's face, his empty promises, the humiliation that had made her flee her hometown. And now, a new fear was beginning to grow in her chest, a fear that would soon turn into a certainty that would change everything. What she didn't know was that that afternoon of hot chocolate and shared memories would be one of the last before her world turned upside down. Fate, in its cruel irony, was setting the stage for revelations that would test the fragile bonds that were beginning to form in that house marked by pain. The first changes began subtly, almost imperceptibly. It was early December, and the approaching summer heat made the days longer and stuffier. Sarah began to feel nauseous in the morning, an ailment she tried to disguise, but that gradually became more difficult to hide. On that specific morning, the smell of the coffee that Mrs. Mercedes was making made her stomach churn violently. She ran to the nearest bathroom, barely managing to contain the nausea. When she came out, she found the housekeeper watching her with a look that mixed concern and something else, a silent understanding that made Sarah freeze inside. "How long has this been going on?" asked the woman, her voice softer than usual. "It's nothing." Sarah tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "It must be something I ate." Mrs. Mercedes shook her head slightly. I'm old enough to recognize the signs, girl, and experienced enough to know when someone is carrying too heavy a weight alone. The housekeeper's words hit Sarah like a blow. Her eyes filled with tears that she had been holding back for weeks. There, in the silent hallway of the mansion, she felt her defenses begin to crumble. I don't know what to do, she whispered, her voice breaking. I can't lose this job. I can't lose them. The confession hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Mrs. Mercedes took her hand, leading her to the kitchen. In silence, she prepared a chamomile tea and placed the steaming cup in front of Sarah. The father, began the housekeeper cautiously. It's not Mr. Aguiar's, Sarah interrupted quickly, horrified by the suggestion. It's from before, from when I still lived upstate. Her hands trembled as she held the cup. The memories she tried so hard to repress came to the surface. Uerton, with his seductive smile and empty promises, the brief relationship she had with him, believing in his words of eternal love, the discovery that he was married, the abandonment, the public humiliation that had made her flee her town. He doesn't know, she continued, the words coming out as a painful outburst. When I found out, he was already gone, back to his wife, as if I had never existed. Mrs. Mercedes listened in silence, her wise eyes fixed on Sarah. From upstairs came the sound of Alex's voice calling. I can't lose. This, Sarah repeated, wiping away the tears hastily. Alex, he's starting to open up, to trust. And Mr. Aguiar, even with all his distance, is trying to get closer to his son. I can't destroy what we're building. But you can't hide it forever, replied the housekeeper softly. In a few weeks, it will be impossible to disguise. Sarah knew she was right. She'd already noticed her clothes fitting tighter, the constant tiredness that accompanied her. Soon, not even the loose dresses she had started wearing could hide her condition. She went up to attend to Alex, trying to recompose herself on the way. The boy was in his wheelchair, bent over a new drawing. In recent days, he had dedicated himself to creating a complete imaginary world with elaborate characters and stories. Sarah, look, he called excitedly, showing the paper. It's a family of dragons. The little dragon can't fly because he hurt his wing, but the other dragons take care of him. She felt her heart clench as she realized the unconscious parallel that Alex made with his own situation. She sat beside him, observing the details of the drawing. The smaller dragon was in a chair with wheels, and the larger dragons surrounded him with expressions of affection. It's a very beautiful family, she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. You can be that dragon here, he pointed to a figure with blue wings, because you also take care of me. Alex's innocent words hit her with full force. How could she continue there, building this relationship of trust, knowing that soon she would have to leave? How could she explain to a child who had already lost so much that another important person in his life would have to go away? The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine activities and anguished thoughts. Sarah noticed that Noah watched her more carefully during dinner, his eyes registering her pallor, the way she barely touched her food. There was an unasked question in his gaze, but he remained silent. At night, when everyone had already retired, Sarah found Noah in his study. He was standing by the window, as he usually did when something disturbed him. Alex showed me the drawing of the dragons, he said without turning around. Since the accident, he had never included other people in his drawings, only him and his mother. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. He's making a lot of progress. He's an amazing boy. Thanks to you. Noah turned, his eyes meeting hers with a disconcerting intensity. You brought life back to this house, to my son, to... He didn't complete the sentence. but the unspoken hung between them like a physical presence. For a moment, the silence in the study became charged with unexpressed meanings. "Are you okay?" he asked finally, his voice softer. "You seem different in recent days." The moment to tell the truth was there, presenting itself like an open door. Sarah felt the weight of her secret threatening to suffocate her, but then she thought of Alex, of his newfound smiles, of the fragile trust he had built. She thought of Noah, slowly starting to reconnect with his son. "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a smile. "Just a little tired." When she returned to her rented room that night, Sarah cried until she had no more tears. She caressed her still imperceptible belly, feeling the weight of decisions she would soon need to make. On the wall, a calendar marked the inexorable passage of days, each one bringing her closer to the moment when she could no longer hide the truth. What she didn't know was that fate was preparing a different path than she imagined. In the following weeks, unexpected events would completely change the course of her story, bringing to light truths that would transform not only her life, but the lives of everyone in that house, marked by pain and hope. The month of December advanced, bringing with it not only the intense heat of summer, but also a growing anxiety that Sarah could no longer disguise. Her dresses, once fitted, were now replaced by looser, longer styles. The morning sickness had become her constant companion, as well as the fear that consumed her every night in her solitary room. One particularly difficult morning, while helping Alex with his physiotherapy exercises, the reality of her situation hit her with full force. The boy, always observant, noticed when she stopped abruptly in the middle of a movement, bringing her hand to her mouth. "Are you sick?" he asked, his big eyes filled with genuine concern. "It's nothing, honey." She tried to smile, but her pallor betrayed her. "Just a passing discomfort." "Lie," said Alex with the typical frankness of children. "You're different. You seem sad, even when you smile." The innocent observation hit Sarah like an arrow. It was true. She was different. Not only physically, but her soul carried a weight that became more difficult to bear with each passing day. "You know," continued the boy, picking up his colored pencils, "when I'm sad, I make a drawing. Mom said that drawing is like telling a secret to the paper." Sarah watched in silence as he began to draw. His strokes, once hesitant, now flowed more confidently. On the paper, a female figure began to take shape. She had brown hair like hers and held something in her arms. "It's you," explained Alex, "with the baby." The pencil fell from Sarah's hands, making a dull thud as it hit the floor. Her heart was beating so hard it felt like it wanted to escape from her chest. "Ba baby," she stammered, feeling the blood drain from her face. "Yes," he replied with simplicity, "like Mrs. Mercedes' daughter. She told me that when her daughter was expecting a baby, she would get sick in the morning, just like you." At that moment, footsteps in the hallway made Sarah freeze. Noah appeared in the doorway, a folder of documents in his hands. His eyes went from the drawing to Sarah's pale face, then to his son. "Alex," he called with his deep voice. "What are you drawing?" "It's Sarah with her baby," the boy replied innocently. "It's going to be nice to have a baby in the house, isn't it, Dad? Like a little brother." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could hear her own heart pounding, the blood rushing in her ears. Noah remained still, his face an impenetrable mask. "Alex," he said finally, his voice controlled, "can you give us a moment? I need to talk to Sarah." The boy looked from one to the other, sensing the tension in the air. "But don't yell at her, Dad. Babies are gifts from God. That's what Mrs. Mercedes said." As soon as Alex left, pushed by Mrs. Mercedes, who appeared as if summoned by a silent call, Noah closed the door. The click of the doorknob sounded like a sentence for Sarah. "How long?" he asked, still with his back to her. 3 months, she replied in a faint voice. "And when were you planning to tell me?" The question caught her off guard. There was something strange in his tone, a nuance she couldn't decipher. "Mr. Aguiar," she began, her hands trembling, "it's not what you're thinking. No." He turned around, sharply, his eyes burning with an intensity that made her step back. "Then explain it to me, Sarah. Explain how my son, who barely spoke when you arrived, now talks about having a sibling. Explain how this house, which was a tomb, now has life again. Explain how you managed to do in months what I couldn't do in years." The last words came out as a contained scream, laden with an old and deep pain. Sarah realized that it wasn't anger she saw in his eyes. It was fear. Fear of losing the fragile happiness that was beginning to be reborn in that house. "The baby," she began, tears streaming down her face, "isn't yours. It's from before I came to work here." Noah didn't seem to register her words immediately. When he did, a series of emotions crossed his face. Surprise, confusion, and then something that looked a lot like relief. "The father?" he asked more softly. "He's no longer around," she replied, her voice choked. He had another family. When he found out, he simply disappeared." Silence returned to fill the room, but different now, less accusatory, more understanding. Noah approached slowly, picking up the drawing that Alex had made. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I love this job too much," the words came between sobs. "I love Alex too much. I didn't want to lose this. I didn't want you to think that That you what, Sarah?" His voice was gentle now. "That you brought light back to this house. That you made my son smile again. That you taught us to live again." She raised her eyes, meeting his. For the first time since she had met him, she saw tears shining in that gaze that was always so controlled. "Clara would say that you were an angel sent to us," he continued, his voice hoarse with emotion. "And Alex, he's already decided that he wants to be a brother to this baby. But I can't stay," she whispered. "In a few weeks I won't be able to do my job properly anymore. And then—" "We'll see later," he interrupted firmly. "But you're not alone, Sarah, not anymore." At that moment, a soft knock on the door preceded Alex's entrance. He had returned with a new drawing. This time, the dragons from his imaginary story had one more cub. "See, Dad?" he said with a smile. "Now the family is bigger." Sarah felt something break inside her, not from pain, but as if a wall of protection she had built around her heart finally collapsed. The tears now flowed freely down her face, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of fear or sadness. What she didn't know, as she watched father and son animatedly discussing the new drawing, was that that moment of truth would only be the beginning. Fate still held twists and turns that would test the strength of those newly formed bonds, bringing to light even deeper secrets that would forever change the course of their lives. The weeks that followed the revelation of the pregnancy brought significant changes to the Aguiar mansion. Sarah's room was moved upstairs next to Alex's, at Noah's insistence. "It doesn't make sense for you to continue living in that little rented room," he had said, his voice brooking no argument. "Here we can take better care of you." But the deepest change wasn't physical. It was the atmosphere of the house that had completely transformed. The oppressive silence that once dominated the hallways gave way, little by little, to conversations, laughter, and, above all, to Alex's endless questions about the baby. "How will he fit here?" the boy asked one afternoon, touching Sarah's belly that was beginning to become more visible. "And how will he breathe? And when will he be able to play with me?" Sarah answered each question with patience, her heart warming. to see the boy's genuine interest. But there were moments, especially during the night, when the weight of her situation hit her with full force. One of those nights, while everyone was asleep, she found herself in the kitchen, fighting against a particularly strong wave of nausea. That's when she heard footsteps approaching. "Can't sleep?" Noah's voice surprised her. He was standing in the doorway, still dressed in his work suit, as if he had also spent the night awake. "The baby is restless today," she replied, trying to smile despite the discomfort. Noah approached, pulling up a chair. For a moment they were silent, only the ticking of the kitchen clock filling the air. "Clara also had insomnia," he said softly, his gaze lost in memories. "When she was pregnant with Alex, she would spend entire nights here in the kitchen. She said the baby danced more at night." It was rare for Noah to talk about Clara. Each mention of her name was like a small window opening, allowing glimpses of the man he had been before the tragedy. "How did you meet?" Sarah asked, taking advantage of that moment of openness. A sad smile played on his lips. "In culinary school. I was starting my first restaurant, full of dreams and plans. Clara was a children's cooking teacher. She believed that teaching children to cook was a way to show love. That's why Alex likes the kitchen so much," observed Sarah. "Yes, before the accident, they spent hours here doing experiments. Clara had this gift. She transformed simple moments into precious memories." His voice failed on the last word. Sarah realized that his hands, always so steady, were trembling slightly. "After she was gone," he continued with difficulty, "I got lost. I plunged into work, built more restaurants, created an empire. But I couldn't look at my own son without seeing Clara in him. Every smile, every gesture." "You were protecting your heart," Sarah said softly. "No," he shook his head. "I was being cowardly. Alex needed me, and I abandoned him in his own suffering until you arrived." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken meanings. Sarah felt the baby move, as if responding to the intensity of the moment. "Are you afraid?" Noah asked suddenly. "Every moment," she admitted, her hand instinctively landing on her belly, "afraid of not being enough, of not knowing how to raise this child alone, of—" "You're not alone," he interrupted firmly. "Not anymore." His words, so simple and direct, made the tears she was trying to contain overflow. Noah got up, taking something from one of the kitchen drawers. It was a yellowed envelope. "I found this today, organizing some old things," he said, extending the envelope to her. "They're Clara's recipes. She wrote them for Alex, explaining each step as if telling a story. I thought maybe you'd want to continue that tradition with him." Sarah took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, she found pages and pages written by hand, with drawings in the margins and small loving notes. It was more than a cookbook, it was a treasure trove of family memories. "Mr. Aguiar," she began, moved. "Noah," he corrected softly. "I think after everything, you can call me Noah." At that moment, hesitant footsteps in the hallway caught their attention. Alex appeared in the kitchen doorway, in his wheelchair. "I couldn't sleep," he said, his face sleepy. "Can I stay here with you?" "Of course, honey," replied Sarah, wiping away the tears discreetly. "How about we make hot chocolate? I just got a very special recipe." The boy's eyes lit up at the sight of the envelope in her hands. "They're Mom's recipes. Dad, you kept them." "I kept everything," replied Noah, his voice hoarse. "Every memory, every moment." As they prepared the hot chocolate following Clara's detailed instructions, Sarah watched father and son interacting. There was something different in the air, as if the kitchen walls held not only the memories of the past, but also the promises of a brighter future. The baby moved again, more gently now, as if also feeling the peace of that moment. Sarah smiled, thinking about how life had mysterious ways of healing old wounds. What she didn't know was that that night of confidences and hot chocolate would be remembered later as the moment when everything truly began to change. Because sometimes the past needs to be revealed so that the future can begin. But fate still held surprises that would test the strength of those newly formed bonds. Deeper secrets were waiting to come to light, and the peace of that night in the kitchen would only be the prelude to a storm that no one could foresee. January arrived, bringing a stifling heat and changes that no one could predict. Sarah's belly was now impossible to hide, and with it grew an unease that she couldn't explain. Something in the air, a feeling that the peace of the last few days was just the calm before the storm. One particularly hot afternoon, while helping Alex with his homework, Sarah felt a strong dizziness. The last thing she saw was the boy's frightened face calling for help before everything went dark. She woke up in a hospital room, the characteristic smell of antiseptic invading her nostrils. Noah was sitting next to her, his face marked by worry. "What happened?" she asked, trying to sit up. "You fainted," he replied, gently preventing her from getting up. "The doctor said your blood pressure is very low. Why didn't you tell me you weren't eating properly?" Sarah looked away, embarrassed. It was true. In recent weeks, she could barely keep food down. The constant nausea and worries had affected her appetite more than she would like to admit. "I didn't want to worry anyone," she murmured. "Didn't want to worry?" His voice had a tone of disbelief. "Sarah, you're part of our family now. Your health, your well-being are our concern too." Family. The word hit Sarah like a punch in the stomach, because just that morning, before fainting, she had received a call that threatened to destroy everything she had built in recent months. "Noah," she began, her voice trembling, "I need to tell you something." But before she could continue, the door to the room opened. Alex entered in his wheelchair, pushed by Mrs. Mercedes. His eyes were red from crying. "Sarah!" he exclaimed, his little hands gripping the bed rail. "Are you going to be okay? Is the baby okay?" "We're okay, honey," she smiled, swallowing the words she needed to say. How could she tell him now, seeing the fear in his eyes? The doctor entered soon after, carrying a clipboard. "Gentlemen, I need to talk to the patient alone." Noah hesitated, but eventually left with Alex and Mrs. Mercedes. The doctor, a gray-haired man with a kind look, pulled up a chair. "Miss Miller," he began, consulting his notes. "In addition to low blood pressure, your tests show severe anemia. We need to discuss your prenatal care." "Doctor," she interrupted, her voice low, "is there anything else I need to know?" The doctor looked at her carefully. "Yes, in the tests we detected a condition that requires constant monitoring. The baby is fine, but you will need absolute bed rest in the coming months." The news fell like a bomb. Absolute bed rest meant not being able to work, not being able to take care of Alex. It meant depending even more on the Aguiar's kindness, just when she knew she would need to leave. When Noah returned to the room, he found Sarah crying silently. "What is it?" he asked, alarmed. The baby is fine," she interrupted him, wiping away the tears. "But I need to be on bed rest. I won't be able to work for a while." "Is that all?" He seemed relieved. "Sarah, we've already talked about this. You're not alone." "You don't understand," she whispered, the words she had been keeping finally escaping. "He found me, Noah. Ewerton called me this morning." The silence that followed was deafening. Noah sat down slowly, his face a mask of concern. "What does he want?" "He said he found out about the pregnancy, that he wants to be part of the baby's life," she sobbed. "But I know him. He just wants to torment me, to make me ashamed again. I need to leave before he comes here." "No," Noah's voice was firm. "You're not going anywhere, not in this state." But he's going to come, she insisted. He's going to destroy everything. He's going to tell everyone how he tricked me, how stupid I was to believe him. I can't go through that again. I can't. Look at me. Noah held her hands firmly. No one is going to hurt you. No one is going to humiliate you. I won't allow it. Why? She asked, her voice broken. Why do you care so much? Because you saved my family, he replied simply. You saved my son. You saved me. Now it's our turn to protect you. At that moment, Alex returned to the room carrying a new drawing. It was a familiar scene, dragons protecting their cub. I made it for you, he said, placing the paper on the bed, so you won't be afraid anymore. Sarah looked at the drawing, at the boy, at Noah. How could she leave them? How could she abandon this family that had become hers? What if she began hesitantly? What if he tries to take the baby away from me? He won't. Noah's voice was categorical. I have good lawyers. If he wants war, he'll have war. But you and this baby are under my protection now. His words lit a small flame of hope in Sarah's heart. But the fear was still there, whispering in her ear, reminding her of all the empty promises she had already believed. What she didn't know was that Ewerton wasn't the only shadow from the past about to return. Other secrets, older and more painful, were about to come to light, testing the bonds of this makeshift family in a way that no one could foresee. That night, after everyone left, Sarah stayed awake in the hospital room, one hand on her growing belly, the other holding Alex's drawing. Outside, the city slept under a starless sky, unaware of the storms that were approaching. In his study, Noah made calls, moving pieces of a game that had only just begun. And somewhere, not far from there, Ewerton planned his next move, unaware that he was about to face forces far more powerful than his petty revenge. The protection promised by Noah would be tested sooner than anyone imagined, and the real motives behind Ewerton's return would provoke revelations that would forever change the fate of all involved. The return home after the hospitalization was marked by a tense quiet. Sarah, now installed in a larger room downstairs, a change insisted upon by Noah to prevent her from having to climb stairs, felt the weight of the protection she received as an impossible debt to repay. Mrs. Mercedes had become her constant shadow, appearing with teas, vitamins, and small meals at the most unlikely times. You need to eat right, the housekeeper said with a maternal firmness that made Sarah's eyes fill with tears. One particularly difficult afternoon, while she was lying in her new bed, she heard a soft knock on the door. It was Alex in his wheelchair, carrying a storybook. Can I stay here with you? He asked timidly. Now that you can't come to my room, I thought I could come and read to you. The innocent gesture broke something inside Sarah. How could that boy, who had already suffered so many losses, have such a big heart? Of course you can, honey, she replied, helping him settle down next to her bed. Alex opened the book. It was a story about a family of birds building a new nest. As he read, with his childish voice stumbling over some of the more difficult words, Sarah noticed Noah standing in the doorway, watching the scene with an indescribable expression. Dad, called Alex upon noticing his presence. Come listen. To the story, too. It's about a family like ours. The word ours made Sarah's heart clench. Noah entered the room, sitting in an armchair nearby. For a moment, they were like that. Alex reading, Sarah and Noah listening, like a normal family sharing a quiet afternoon. But the peace was interrupted by the ringing of Sarah's cell phone. The number on the screen made her blood run cold. You don't have to answer, said Noah, noticing her panicked expression, but she knew she had to. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone and went out into the hallway, closing the door softly behind her. What do you want, Ewerton? Her Voice came out firmer than she expected. "Is that any way to talk to me, darling?" His voice, honeyed and falsely sweet, made her stomach churn. "I just want to know how my son is doing." "He's not your son," she replied through clenched teeth. "You made that very clear when you disappeared." "Ah, but things have changed," he laughed softly. "I heard you're living in the Aguiar mansion. Now, very convenient, isn't it? The lonely rich man and the pregnant maid." "It's not like that," she interrupted, feeling tears burning her eyes. "They just what? Took you in out of kindness. Please, Sarah, don't be naive." "Not again." His words hit her like slaps. Memories she tried to forget came back with full force. The empty promises, the hidden encounters, the humiliation when she discovered the truth. "Listen carefully," he continued, his voice losing its false sweetness. "Tomorrow I'm coming over there. I need to make sure my son is well, taken care of. After all, I can't let him grow up thinking that that businessman is his father, can I?" "Don't you dare," she whispered. "Or what? Are you going to stop me? With what power? I'm the father, Sarah. I have rights." The call ended abruptly, leaving Sarah trembling in the hallway. When she turned around, she found Noah standing behind her. "How long have you been there?" she asked, startled. "Long enough," he replied, his face a mask of concern. "Come on, we need to talk." In the study, Noah poured a glass of water for Sarah before sitting down opposite her. "Tell me everything," he asked gently. "From the beginning." And she told him. How she met Ewerton in her hometown, how he courted her with promises of eternal love, how she discovered in the worst possible way that he was married and had a family in another city. He organized a dinner. Her voice trembled as she remembered. "He said he was going to introduce me to his friends, but when I got there was his wife. He had planned everything, humiliated me in front of everyone, said I was just a temporary amusement." Noah listened in silence, his fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles were white. "I ran away that night," she continued. "I couldn't stand the looks, the whispers anymore. I came here to start over, and then you found out you were pregnant," he completed softly. "Yes, but I never told him. I don't know how he found out." "I do." A new voice joined the conversation. Mrs. Mercedes was standing in the doorway, her normally stern face marked by worry. "Forgive me for intruding, but I think I need to tell you something." The housekeeper entered the study, closing the door behind her. In her hands, she held a local newspaper. "There's an article about you in the social column," she explained, extending the newspaper. "About how businessman Noah Aguiar was taking in a young pregnant woman in a difficult situation. Someone must have recognized Sarah in the photos." Noah took the newspaper, his face darkening as he read the article. It was sensationalist, full of malicious insinuations about the nature of the relationship between him and Sarah. "That explains it," he murmured. "It's not about the baby that he's coming back. It's about the money." Sarah felt the world spin. "What do you mean?" "Think about it," Noah continued. "He saw the article, found out that you're under my protection. He must think he can get some kind of financial settlement." "Oh, God," she whispered, her hands protectively over her belly. "What am I going to do?" "We," corrected Noah firmly, "what we are going to do, and the answer is we are going to fight." But before they could elaborate any plan, they heard a noise coming from the hallway. Alex was there, in his wheelchair, silent tears streaming down his face. "Don't let him take the baby, Dad," the boy pleaded. "Please don't let him hurt Sarah." Alex's desperate plea pierced the hearts of everyone in the room. Noah knelt beside his son's chair, wiping away his tears. "No one is going to hurt our family," he promised. "No one." What none of them knew was that Ewerton wasn't the only threat approaching. Because that same night, while the Aguiar mansion prepared for the battle to come, another character from the past was about to enter the scene, bringing with them revelations that would forever change the fate of all. The morning arrived laden. With apprehension, Sarah had barely slept, tossing and turning in bed, while her mind created 1,000 different scenarios about what could happen. The baby, sensing her anguish, moved restlessly in her belly. Noah had spent the night in his study, making calls and organizing what he called legal protection. Mrs. Mercedes alternated between bringing him strong coffee and soothing teas for Sarah. Alex, against all expectations, was the only one who managed to sleep, although his sleep was restless, marked by nightmares that made him call for Sarah several times during the night. "He's going to arrive any minute," said Sarah, stirring listlessly in the porridge that Mrs. Mercedes had prepared. "I know Ewerton. He likes to make dramatic entrances." As if to confirm her words, the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the house like a harbinger of the storm. "Stay here," ordered Noah, his voice brooking no argument. "Mrs. Mercedes, please take Alex to his room." "No," protested the boy. "I want to stay with Sarah." "Honey," Sarah leaned down to hug him, ignoring the twinge of pain in her back. "I need you to be strong now. Go with Mrs. Mercedes. I promise we'll talk later, okay?" Reluctantly, Alex allowed the housekeeper to take him away. His eyes, however, remained fixed on Sarah until they disappeared down the hallway. The sound of raised voices came from the entrance of the house. Sarah immediately recognized Ewerton's falsely cordial tone. "Well, well," he said, as he entered the living room where Noah was waiting for him. "So it's true. Little Sarah managed to hook the big fish." "Mr. Moreira," Noah's voice was icy, "I suggest you measure your words." Ewerton smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was exactly as Sarah remembered, tall, well-dressed, with that air of superiority that had once charmed her and now disgusted her. "Where is she?" he asked, looking around. "Where is the mother of my son?" "Here," Sarah replied, entering the room supported by Mrs. Mercedes, who had returned silently. Her voice trembled slightly, but her gaze was firm. Ewerton's eyes scanned her figure, stopping at her prominent belly. Something dark passed over his face. "I see you're well settled," he commented with false concern. "It must be much more comfortable than that little room where we used to meet, isn't it?" "What do you want?" she asked directly. "I want to meet my son, of course," he replied, feigning surprise. "What kind of father would I be if I didn't care about the well-being of my own child?" "The same kind that you were when you disappeared without a trace," she retorted. "The same kind that you are with your other family." The mention of his other family made Ewerton's smile falter for a moment. "That's in the past," he said, taking a step towards her. "Now, I want to do the right thing." "Don't come closer." Noah's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Or what?" Ewerton turned to him, the veneer of cordiality beginning to crack. "Are you going to stop me from seeing my son? With what right?" "With the right that the law gives me," replied Noah calmly, picking up a folder from the table. "My lawyers have prepared some documents that you should read." "Lawyers?" Ewerton laughed, but there was a touch of nervousness in his voice. "Don't tell me you're going to play the knight in shining armor for her. What did she tell you? That I abandoned her? That I tricked her?" "She didn't need to tell me anything," interrupted a new voice. Everyone turned to the door. A woman was standing there, elegant, middle-aged, with an air of wounded dignity that made Ewerton pale visibly. "Eleanor?" he whispered, all his air of confidence disappearing. "Surprised to see me, dear?" she asked, entering the room. "You shouldn't be. After all, after you disappeared 3 months ago, leaving only debts and flimsy excuses, I knew I'd find you following. The scent of money." Sarah watched the scene with a mixture of shock and confusion. Helena, Ewerton's wife, the woman who had participated in her public humiliation, was there, but something was different. The contempt that she had once directed at her was now all directed at her husband. "What's going on?" asked Sarah, her voice weak. Helena turned to her, her eyes softening. Forgive me, dear. It took me too long to see the truth. Ewerton, he's been doing this for years, seducing young women, making up love stories, then using what he finds out about them to get money. It's not true, protested Ewerton, but his voice had lost all its confidence. No. Helena took some papers from her bag. Then how do you explain these accounts? The loans in the names of other women, the blackmail. Ewerton's face went through several colors as Helena continued. When he disappeared, I started investigating. I found others, so many others, all with similar stories, all young, dreamy, looking for love. And now, when I saw the news about you, she looked at Sarah. I knew he'd try again. Sarah felt her legs weaken. Mrs. Mercedes quickly brought a chair, helping her to sit down. So it was never about the baby? She asked, her voice choked. It's never about the babies or about love, replied Helena bitterly. It's always about money. When he saw that you were being protected by someone with resources, he must have thought it was his big chance. This is ridiculous, exploded Ewerton. You can't prove anything. No? Noah finally spoke, his voice dangerously calm. The documents. I mentioned are records of all your victims, testimonials, evidence of fraud, everything documented. The police are already on their way. Ewerton's face lost all color. His eyes darted to the door, like a cornered animal looking for escape. It was at that moment that a sound of wheels in the hallway caught everyone's attention. Alex had escaped Mrs. Mercedes' vigilance and was now standing at the door, his big eyes fixed on the scene before him. You're not going to hurt my family, he said with a surprising firmness for a child. You're not going to take our baby. Alex's simple words seemed to be the final blow. Ewerton, seeing himself completely cornered, dropped the mask of confidence he had been wearing, but what no one expected was that that moment of revelation would only be the beginning. Because while everyone watched Ewerton's collapse, no one noticed the envelope that had fallen from Helena's bag. An envelope that contained an even more surprising truth, a connection that no one could suspect. And that was about to change forever, the fate of that makeshift family. The fallen envelope went unnoticed during the turmoil that followed. Ewerton was taken away by the police, his face a mask of defeat and bitterness. Helena remained in the room, exhausted after giving her statement to the officers. Sarah, still, trembling from the events, accepted a cup of tea from Mrs. Mercedes's ever-attentive hands. It was Alex who noticed it first, his curious gaze fixed on the yellowed envelope that had slipped under an armchair. Mrs. Helena, he called, pointing. Oh, you dropped that. Helena bent down to pick up the envelope, but upon seeing what it was, her face paled visibly. My God, she whispered. I had almost forgotten about it. What is it? Asked Noah, noticing her distress. Helena hesitated, looking from Sarah to Noah, as if assessing something important. They're old documents, she replied slowly. Actually, it was because of them that I started investigating Ewerton more thoroughly. I found them among his things a few months ago. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. From inside, she took out some papers yellowed with age and an old photograph. When I saw the news about you in the paper, she continued, looking at Sarah, your name seemed familiar, but I couldn't remember from where. Then, reviewing these documents, she extended the photograph to Sarah. It was a faded image showing a young couple with a baby in their arms. Sarah took the photo carefully, her eyes widening as she recognized the faces. It's my parents, she whispered, her voice choked. But how? Your father's name was Robert Miller, wasn't it? Asked Helena softly. And your mother, Mary Clara? Sarah nodded, unable to speak. She hadn't seen a photo of her parents in years. They had abandoned her when she was just a baby, leaving her in the care of her grandmother without ever giving news again. Robert worked for Ewerton's father, explained Helena. He was the company accountant. One day he discovered irregularities in the accounts, embezzlement, fraud, a scheme that had been going on for years. Noah approached, placing a protective hand on Sarah's shoulder, who was trembling visibly. "Your father tried to report it," continued Helena, "but he was threatened. When you were born, the threats began to include you and your mother. So they abandoned me," completed Sarah, tears streaming down her face. "They left me with Grandma and disappeared." "No," corrected Helena gently. "They protected you. They left you with your grandmother because they knew it was the only safe place. They planned to come back when everything was resolved, but—" She stopped, as if the next words were too painful to pronounce. "But?" insisted Sarah, although part of her already knew the answer. "There was an accident." Helena lowered her eyes. "Their car was found in a ravine. At the time, it was considered an accident, but now, after discovering so many other stories about Ewerton's family—" The silence that followed was heavy, laden with decades of pain and secrets. Sarah felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. All her life she had believed that she had been abandoned, that her parents didn't love her enough to stay. And now— "They died to protect me," she whispered, the reality of that truth hitting her like a wave. It was Alex who broke the moment of shock. He moved his wheelchair closer to Sarah and took her hand. "Like me and Mom," he said softly. "She protected me too." "Ndulm." The boy's simple words triggered something in Sarah. The tears, which until then had fallen silently, turned into deep sobs. Years of hurt, of feelings of abandonment, of unanswered questions, all of that was transformed into a different pain. The pain of finally understanding. Noah knelt beside her, enveloping her in a protective embrace. Alex kept her hand safe, as if trying to pass strength through his touch. "There's one more thing," said Helena, her voice hesitant. "Something I discovered only yesterday, when I finally gained access to all the old documents." She took one more paper from the envelope. It was an old certificate, the paper already yellowed at the edges. "Clara, your mother." Helena seemed to choose her words carefully. "She was a second cousin of someone you know well." Sarah raised her eyes, confused. Helena extended the document to Noah, who took it with an intrigued expression. His eyes ran over the paper, stopping abruptly at one point. His face lost color. "Mary Clara was related to Clara," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Your mother was related to my wife." The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah looked at Noah without being able to completely process what she had just heard. Alex looked from one to the other, his big eyes full of confusion and astonishment. "They shared the same name," continued Noah, his voice choked. "Clara always talked about a dear cousin who had lost contact, who had mysteriously disappeared." "So," began Alex slowly, "does that mean that Sarah is really our family?" The boy's innocent question fell like a drop on a calm lake, creating ripples that expanded in all directions. Sarah felt the baby move in her belly, as if also reacting to this extraordinary revelation. Mrs. Mercedes, who had remained silent until then, let out a stifled sob. "God writes straight with crooked lines," she murmured, wiping her eyes with her apron. Helena watched the scene with a mixture of relief and sadness. "When I realized the connection," she said softly, "I knew I needed to bring these documents. You deserved to know the truth." But there was something else in her gaze, something that suggested that there were still revelations to be made. The envelope in her hands was not yet empty, and fate still had a few more cards to play in that story that seemed increasingly intricate. What no one could foresee was that this discovery would only be the beginning of a series of revelations that would forever change not only the present, but also the understanding of the past. Because sometimes the bonds that unite us are deeper and older than we can imagine, woven by time into patterns that only fate can comprehend. Night fell on the Aguiar mansion, but no one could sleep. The revelation about the kinship between the two Claras had opened a door to a past that refused to remain buried. Helena still held the envelope, her fingers playing nervously with something that remained inside it. Sarah was sitting on the sofa, the photograph of her parents in her hands, studying every detail as if she could recover lost time through that faded image. Noah paced back and forth, his mind clearly processing all the implications of that discovery. "There's something you need to see," said Helena finally, removing a last item from the envelope, an old diary, its pages yellowed with age. "What is that?" asked Sarah, her voice hoarse from crying. "It belonged to your mother," replied Helena softly. "Ewerton kept it along with the other documents. I don't think even he really knew what he had in his hands." With trembling hands, Sarah took the diary. On the first page, her mother's delicate handwriting formed a dedication for my daughter Sarah, so that one day you will understand. She wrote to me," whispered Sarah, new tears springing to her eyes. Alex, who had insisted on staying awake despite the lateness of the hour, brought his wheelchair closer. "Read it to us," he asked softly, "like I read my stories to you." Sarah opened the diary with reverent care and began to read. "My dear daughter, if you are reading this, it means that something went wrong in our plans. It means that we couldn't come back to get you as we so wanted. But I need you to know, every day away from you was torture. Every moment without being able to hug you was a piece of my heart being torn out. Your cousin Clara was the one who gave me the idea of writing this diary. She always said that written words are bridges over time, connecting hearts even when the distance seems infinite. Clara, my dear cousin whom fate took so far away. She doesn't even know that she is also expecting a baby. Our children could have grown up together like siblings." Sarah stopped reading, looking at Noah with wide eyes. "They were pregnant at the same time?" Noah nodded slowly. "Clara, my Clara. She always said that she felt a special connection with Alex, as if he wasn't her first child. Now I understand why." Sarah continued reading. "Today, Robert discovered something terrible in the company's accounts. Dirty money, deaths disguised as accidents, a web of lies so big that it makes me dizzy just thinking about it. Ewerton's father is a monster, and his son follows in his footsteps. They threatened our family today. They said that if Robert said anything, they would start with you, our little Sarah. We made the most difficult decision of our lives. We're going to leave you with your grandmother. It's the only safe place, the only place where they can't reach you. They say that a mother dies 1,000 deaths for her child. Today I understood the meaning of that. Every step away from you is like a little death. Clara once told me that a mother's love is like water. It always finds a way, even through the hardest stones. I hope that one day you understand that leaving you was our way of protecting you, of ensuring that you had a chance to live." Sarah's voice failed. Mrs. Mercedes quickly brought a glass of water, her own eyes tearful. "Continue," asked Alex softly. "I need to know what happened." Sarah took a deep breath and returned to the diary. "Last day. I don't know if I will be able to deliver this diary to you. Robert discovered that they are getting close. Tomorrow, we will try to find a way to expose everything, to end this empire of lies. If something happens to us, know that every beat of your heart was a blessing in our lives, that every smile of yours was a ray of sunshine in our darkest days. And Clara, my dear cousin Clara, if by some miracle our paths cross again, tell her that I am sorry for disappearing without explanation. Tell her that her son and mine could have been like brothers, just as we were always like sisters. For you, my Sarah, I leave the greatest treasure that a mother can leave, the truth. You were never abandoned. You were and always will be the greatest love of our lives." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Sarah hugged the diary against her chest, as if she could hug her mother through those yellowed pages. "The two Claras," murmured Noah, his voice choked, "both protecting their children until the end." Helena, who had remained silent during the reading, cleared her throat softly. "There's one more thing," she said, hesitant. "Something I found while investigating the company's old documents more deeply." All eyes turned to her. Helena seemed to struggle with the words, as if what she had to reveal was too heavy. "The accident that killed your parents," she began, slowly, "wasn't the only suspicious accident from that time. There were others, including Clara's accident," completed Noah, his face losing all color. "The accident that killed my wife." The realization hit everyone like an icy wave. The two Claras, the two families, the two accidents, everything began to connect in a terrible and painfully clear pattern. But before anyone could fully process this new revelation, a shrill sound cut through the air, the emergency alarm on. Sarah's cell phone. Her blood pressure had risen dangerously, and the baby was too restless. Fate, in its infinite irony, chose that moment to add another chapter to this story of coincidences and connections. Because while Noah called an ambulance and Mrs. Mercedes ran to get the emergency bag, no one noticed the small detail on the last page of the diary. A note that would change everything once again. The hospital was immersed in that peculiar quiet of the early hours, broken only by the sound of medical equipment and the hurried footsteps of the staff on duty. In the waiting room, Noah held Alex asleep in his arms, while Mrs. Mercedes paced back and forth, murmuring prayers. Helena had stayed at the mansion, organizing the documents and promising to return in the morning with more information. But it was during her search for more clues that she found something disturbing, a series of bank records that linked the two accidents unequivocally. In the hospital room, Sarah had finally managed to calm down. The medication to lower her blood pressure was taking effect, and the baby, after much agitation, had quieted down. The doctor had been emphatic, absolute rest for the next few days. "Miss Miller," called the nurse entering the room, "there's a lady here who insists on seeing you. She said it's urgent." Before Sarah could answer, an elderly woman rushed into the room. Her face, marked by time, showed an urgency that made Sarah sit up in bed, ignoring the dizziness. "Mrs. Matilda," she whispered, recognizing her grandmother's old neighbor. "What? How?" "My child," the woman approached, taking her hands between her own. "When I saw your picture in the newspaper, I could hardly believe it. I spent days trying to gather the courage to come. There's something you need to know." Noah, who had entered the room upon hearing voices, stopped at the door, watching the scene carefully. "Your grandmother," continued Mrs. Matilda, her voice trembling slightly, "before passing, gave me something. She said it was to give to you when the time was right. I think that time has come." With trembling hands, the woman took a yellowed envelope from her bag, similar to the one Helena had found. Inside, there was a letter and an old key. "She knew," said Mrs. Matilda softly. "Your grandmother knew everything." Sarah took the letter with trembling hands, immediately recognizing her grandmother's handwriting. "My dear granddaughter, if you are reading this, it means that the truth has finally begun to come to light. Forgive me for not telling you before, but I promised your parents that I would keep the secret until it was safe. The key that I send along with this letter opens a safe deposit box in Central Bank. Inside it, there is all the evidence that your father gathered. Documents, photographs, records that prove the crimes of the Miller family. Your father didn't trust anyone to keep this evidence, except Clara, not your mother, but her cousin Clara, wife of Noah Aguiar. Yes, dear, Clara knew everything. It was she who helped your parents hide the evidence. It was she who created the plan to protect you, and that was why she also became a target. The accident that killed her was no coincidence. She was on her way to the bank that day, planning to withdraw the documents and finally expose the truth. She took Alex with her because she believed it was safer than leaving him at home. She would never imagine that they would be able to attack a mother with her son. The water on the floor, the brakes that failed, everything was meticulously planned. But they didn't count on one thing: a mother's love. Clara protected Alex with her own body, just as your parents protected you by leaving you with me. I kept this secret for years, waiting for the right moment. When I saw you grow up so much like your mother, with that same sparkle of determination in your eyes, I knew that one day you would find your way back. And now, seeing your picture next to the Aguiars, I know that fate wove its threads exactly as it should. The key doesn't just open a safe deposit box, it opens the door to the justice that your parents and Clara so sought. Use it wisely, my dear. And remember, sometimes fate takes us down winding paths only to bring us exactly where we should be. With all my love, Grandma Mary. The silence that followed the reading was heavy with revelations. Noah had approached the bed, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Clara," he whispered. "My Clara knew all this time. She was trying to do what was right," said Sarah softly, tears streaming down her face. "For all of us." At that moment, Alex entered the room in his wheelchair, pushed by Mrs. Mercedes. His sleepy eyes widened at the sight of the adult's emotional state. "What happened?" he asked, his small voice laden with concern. "It happened that your mom," replied Noah, kneeling beside his son's chair, "was even more extraordinary than we imagined." "Was she a hero?" asked Alex, his eyes shining. "Yes, honey," replied Sarah, reaching out to hold his hand. "Just like my parents, they all fought for something bigger than themselves." Mrs. Matilda watched the scene with tears in her eyes. "Your grandmother always said that love has many forms," she said softly. "Sometimes it shows itself in sacrifice, sometimes in protection, sometimes it brings us back home," completed Mrs. Mercedes, her voice choked. But while everyone processed these revelations, no one noticed the small movement in Mrs. Matilda's bag. Another envelope, half hidden, that contained the last and most surprising revelation of all. Because the story of the two Claras was not yet completely told, and fate still had one last act to present. Dawn found Sarah still awake in the hospital room, her hands stroking her growing belly distractedly while her mind tried to process all the revelations of the night before. Noah had taken Alex home only a few hours ago, promising to return early in the morning. Mrs. Mercedes had insisted on staying, dozing uncomfortably in an armchair in the corner of the room. It was during those silent hours of the dawn that Mrs. Matilda returned, her face marked by a sleepless night and a barely contained urgency. "There's one more thing," she said, sitting next to Sarah's bed. "Something your grandmother made me swear only to reveal when everything else came to light." With trembling hands, the elderly woman removed a last envelope from her bag, this one newer than the others, written with the shaky handwriting of Sarah's grandmother's last days. "Your grandmother wrote this a few days before passing," explained Mrs. Matilda. "She knew she wouldn't live to see this moment, but she wanted to make sure you knew the whole truth." Sarah took the envelope carefully, her heart beating fast. Beside her, Mrs. Mercedes had woken up and watched the scene in respectful silence. "My beloved Sarah, there is one last truth that I need to tell you, a truth that I have kept in my heart for all these years, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. On the day your parents left, your mother handed me not only you, but also a secret. She was pregnant again. Few knew, only her, your father and Clara, your cousin. They had made plans together, dreaming of their children growing up like siblings. What no one knew is that Clara also kept a secret at that time. She had discovered that she couldn't have any more children after Alex. The accident that took her life not only took the documents that could bring justice, it also took the hope of giving a sibling to her son. But fate, my dear, has mysterious ways of weaving its threads. The baby you carry now is not just another innocent life coming into the world. It is a bridge between two families marked by pain, a chance for redemption that time has finally allowed. Your mother used to say that some souls choose when and where they want to be born. Perhaps that's why you found your way back to the Aguiar family. Perhaps that's why Alex, in his childish innocence, already feels a brotherly love for your baby. There's one more document in the safe deposit box, along with the evidence that your father gathered. It's a DNA test that Clara did in secret, confirming the kinship between the families. She wanted to make sure that if something happened, there would be irrefutable proof linking you all. Love, my dear granddaughter, has many forms of manifesting itself, sometimes through protection, sometimes through sacrifice, and sometimes through coincidences that are not coincidences. Take care of this family that fate has returned to you. Take care of Alex as your mother would have cared for him. And allow yourself to be taken care of by them, because true love knows no limits of blood or time. With all my love and the certainty that now you are exactly where you should be, Grandma Mary. Tears streamed freely down Sarah's face as she finished reading. Mrs. Mercedes sobbed openly in her corner, and even Mrs. Matilda wiped her eyes discreetly. "That's why you felt so connected to Alex from the beginning," said Mrs. Matilda softly. "Blood calls, even when we don't know why." At that moment, the door to the room opened. Noah entered, carrying Alex in his arms. The boy had insisted on returning to the hospital as soon as he woke up. "Sarah," exclaimed Alex, his eyes shining, "I brought a new drawing for the baby." Noah helped his son settle on the edge of the bed, noticing the tears on Sarah's face and the emotionally charged atmosphere. "What happened?" he asked, concerned. Sarah looked at the drawing that Alex was extending to her. It was a family of dragons, as always, but this time there was something different. The baby dragon was in the center, surrounded by all the others, protected and loved. "It happened that fate," she replied softly, "has finally completed its circle." But before she could explain, she felt a strong contraction. The baby, as if she had waited for this moment of revelation, chose that instant to announce her arrival. "The baby," she whispered, a hand on her belly. "I think she wants to participate in this family reunion." The room exploded into activity. Mrs. Mercedes ran to call the doctors. Noah picked up Alex in his arms to make room for the medical team that arrived, and Mrs. Matilda squeezed Sarah's hand, murmuring words of encouragement. No one had noticed one last detail on the grandmother's letter, a small note on the back, written in a different, older handwriting. A message that would complete the circle in a way that no one could imagine, but that would have to wait a few more hours to be discovered. Because now a new life was about to join this story of love, loss, and redemption. The hours that followed in the hospital were a mixture of pain, expectation, and discoveries that no one could have foreseen. While Sarah went into labor, Noah found, fallen on the floor, the back of the letter that no one had noticed before, a message written by Clara herself, his Clara, dated from the day of the accident. "Dear Cousin Mary, if you are reading this, it means that something went wrong with our plan. I kept the documents in the safe deposit box, as agreed, but there's something else I need you to know. Something I discovered this morning, and that changes everything. The tests confirmed I won't be able to have any more children. The doctor was categorical. Alex will be my only child. But perhaps it is fate showing us its bigger plan. Because Now I know that the baby that my cousin Mary is expecting, the one she hides from the world to protect, will have a safe place to grow if something happens to her. Noah is a good man, with a heart bigger than he even knows. If something happens to me, I know that he will take care of Alex with all the love in the world. And I also know that when the time is right, he will know how to recognize the bonds that unite us all. I'm on my way to the bank now. Alex is with me because I don't trust leaving him at home. I have a strange feeling that I can't explain. If all goes well, this letter will never need to be read. But if something happens, keep these words until the right moment. Tell Sarah when she's old enough to understand that her mother loved her more than anything. Tell her that sometimes we need to lose everything to find our true way back home. With love, Clara Aguiar. Noah held the paper with trembling hands, silent tears streaming down his face when the first cries of the baby echoed through the hospital corridor. It was a girl, small, perfect, with a dark down on her head and eyes that, when briefly opened, showed the same shade of brown that he knew so well. "Clara," whispered Sarah, exhausted, but radiant, looking at her newborn daughter. "I want to name her Clara." Alex, who had waited anxiously outside with Mrs. Mercedes, entered the room, pushed by her, his eyes wide with fascination at the sight of the baby. "She's so small," he commented, leaning in his chair to see better. "Can I hold her?" With Noah's help, Alex was carefully positioned on the bed next to Sarah, and little Clara was placed in his arms. The moment when the boy held his sister for the first time would forever be etched in the memory of all those present. "Hello, Clara," he said softly, with a seriousness beyond his years. "I'm your older brother. I will always protect you like Mom protected me." Sarah and Noah exchanged an emotional glance. They didn't need words to express what they felt. That moment was too sacred to be broken by any sound. Mrs. Matilda, who watched the scene from the door, discreetly wiped her eyes. "Your grandmother always said that God works in mysterious ways," she commented. "Now I understand what she meant." Helena arrived shortly after, carrying a folder with documents. But upon seeing the family scene in the room, everything urgent and important she had to say suddenly seemed small before the miracle she witnessed. "The documents from the safe deposit box," she said softly to Noah, "confirm everything. The two Claras, the accidents, the connection between the families. We have enough evidence to finally do justice." But Noah just nodded distractedly, his eyes fixed on his children, because that's how he already saw them, as his children, regardless of blood or documents. "Justice can wait a little longer," he replied. "Now is a time to celebrate life." Sarah watched everything with a tired but happy smile. Her daughter, her little Clara, was living proof that love always finds a way, even through the greatest adversities. The baby fell asleep in Alex's arms, who refused to let her go. His face, normally marked by sadness, now shone with a pure and true joy. "Dad," he called softly, "I think we need a bigger room now, to fit all of Clara's toys too." The simplicity of the request made everyone smile. That's how families were formed, not only by blood or documents, but by moments like that, by love chosen and built day after day. But while everyone admired the baby and made plans for the future, one last revelation was still waiting to be discovered. Because on the back of the old photograph that Mrs. Matilda had brought, there was a note that would complete the circle in a way that no one could imagine. And that discovery, which would forever transform that family's understanding of love, fate, and redemption, was about to come to light in the next few hours. Because sometimes the universe saves its greatest surprises for when our hearts are finally ready to receive them. Night had fallen on the hospital when Mrs. Matilda decided to organize the belongings she had brought. Among the documents and photographs scattered, one in particular caught her attention. an old photo that had been forgotten at the bottom of her bag. "My God," she whispered, studying the back of the photograph with wide eyes. Sarah, who was breastfeeding little Clara for the first time, raised her eyes upon hearing the woman's exclamation. "What is it, Mrs. Matilda?" The elderly woman approached the bed slowly, as if carrying something precious and fragile. "I found this photograph among the things your grandmother gave me to keep. I had never noticed the note on the back before." Noah, who was dozing in the armchair with Alex in his lap, woke up with the commotion. Mrs. Mercedes also approached, curious. The photograph showed two young women embracing and smiling in front of a simple house. On the back, an elegant handwriting read, "For my dear sister Mary, who keeps not only my daughter, but also our greatest secret. May God allow Clara and Sarah to one day discover the truth about their bonds. With love, Helena, 1990. "Helena?" asked Sarah, confused. "But Helena was—" "My mother," completed a voice from the door. Everyone turned to see Helena standing there, her eyes fixed on the photograph with an emotion that no one had seen before. "Did you know?" asked Noah, his voice barely containing his surprise. Helena entered the room, closing the door softly behind her. "I discovered it only a few hours ago, reviewing the last documents from the safe deposit box. There was a letter that changed everything I thought I knew about my own story." "Gee." With trembling hands, she took an envelope from her folder, this one visibly newer than the others, although it already showed signs of time. "This letter was written by my mother, Helena, shortly before she died," she explained. "She left it with specific instructions to only be opened when all the other truths came to light." The silence in the room was absolute as Helena began to read. "My dear daughter, if you are reading this, it means that the moment your Aunt Mary and I have been waiting for so long has finally arrived. The moment when all the secrets we have kept for so many years can finally come to light. You grew up believing you were an only child, but the truth is that you had a sister, a twin sister, separated from you at birth by circumstances that at the time seemed impossible to overcome. Your father, a violent and dangerous man, had threatened to take you both from me. I knew that he would be able to fulfill his threats. It was then that your Aunt Mary, my younger sister, offered a desperate solution. She would raise one of you as her own daughter, keeping her safe and away from your father's reach. The decision to separate two twin sisters was the hardest of our lives. But at that moment, it seemed the only way to ensure that at least one of you had a chance to grow up in safety. Clara, your sister, was raised by Mary as if she were her own daughter. She grew up to be an extraordinary woman, married Noah Aguiar, and had a son, Alex. And you, my Helena, grew up to be equally extraordinary, although unknowingly carrying the weight of a loss that you didn't understand. Fate, in its infinite wisdom, wove the threads of our lives in ways that we could never foresee. Your sister Clara, before passing, discovered the truth about your origins. That was why she trusted so much in her cousin Clara, Noah's wife, because she recognized in her the same strength that our family has always had. Now, seeing Sarah carrying little Clara in her arms, I know that the circle is finally complete. Because that child is not only the granddaughter of Clara and Robert, she is also your niece, carrying in her veins the same blood that runs in yours. Forgive us for having kept this secret for so long. Every decision we made, however painful, was driven by love and the desire to protect. With all my love, your mother, Helena." The silence that followed the reading was heavy with revelations. Sarah looked at Helena, her aunt, with new eyes, finally understanding why she had felt an inexplicable connection with her from the beginning. "That's why you helped us so much," whispered Sarah. "That's why you dedicated yourself to discovering the truth." Helena nodded, tears streaming down her face. When I saw your picture in the newspaper, I felt something that I couldn't explain. It was like looking at a reflection of Clara, my sister, that I never knew. Noah, who had remained silent, processing all the implications of that revelation, finally spoke. Clara, my Clara, she knew. Yes, replied Helena softly. She found out shortly before the accident. That's why she was so determined to protect the documents, to do what was right. It wasn't just about the Miller family's crimes. It was about our whole story. Little Clara chose that moment to let out a small sigh in her sleep, as if she too felt the weight of that moment. Alex, who had woken up and listened to everything in silence, looked at the baby with a new understanding in his young eyes. So, he said slowly, we really are a family. Not just by choice, but by blood too. We've always been a family, replied Sarah, pulling him closer with her free arm. Blood just confirmed what our hearts already knew. But there was still one last detail to be revealed, a detail that would change not only the understanding of the past, but also the course of the future. And that last revelation was kept in a place that no one had thought to look until then. The next morning brought with it not only a new day, but also the last piece of the puzzle that fate had assembled so carefully. Mrs. Mercedes, while tidying up Clara's room, Noah's deceased wife, to welcome Sarah and the baby, who would return from the hospital, found something extraordinary hidden behind a picture on the wall. It was a letter, kept in an envelope already yellowed with time, addressed, "To whoever finds our truth." The handwriting was Clara's, written the night before the accident. When everyone gathered in the hospital room for the last visit before Sarah's discharge, Mrs. Mercedes handed the envelope to Noah with trembling hands. "I found this hidden in the room," she said softly. "I think it's time to be read." Noah opened the envelope with reverent care, recognizing his wife's handwriting. Sarah held little Clara in her arms, while Alex, in his wheelchair, was positioned next to the bed. Helena and Mrs. Matilda watched in respectful silence. "Dearest, if you are reading this letter, it means that fate has finally allowed all the truths to come to light. I write these words on the eve of what I know will be a decisive day in our lives. Tomorrow I will go to the bank to retrieve the documents that can bring justice not only to Sarah's family, but to all of us. I know the risks. I know I'm being watched. But I also know that some truths need to be revealed, no matter the cost. Noah, my love, forgive me for not having shared everything with you. Every secret I kept was in an attempt to protect our family. You have given me the greatest gift I could receive. Our Alex, our little warrior who carries so much strength and so much love within him. Alex, my beloved son, when you read this, you will be old enough to understand. Know that every moment with you was a precious gift. Your smile, your strength in overcoming difficulties, your ability to love, all of that has shown me that true love transcends any obstacle. Sarah, although we may never meet in person, I feel like I already know you through your mother's stories. You carry within you the same strength that I have seen in all the women of our family. I know that one day you will find your way back home, to this house that is also yours by right and by love. Helena, my dear sister-in-law, now you must know the whole truth about our family, about the separated sisters, about the sacrifices made in the name of love and protection. You are not just the wife of the man who caused so much suffering. You are a fundamental part of this story of redemption. I leave in this letter not only words, but also a last gift. In the false bottom of my dresser drawer, there is a document that will change everything. The original birth certificate of the twin sisters, Helena and Clara, along with a bank account that I created in Sarah's name. It's not just money that I leave there, but the guarantee that she and her baby will have a secure future. Because yes, I knew about the baby your mother was expecting, Sarah. Just as I know, in some way that I cannot explain, that one day another child will unite our families again. And when that day comes, I ask that you name her Clara, not for me, but for all the Claras who came before, carrying in them the strength and the love that keeps our family united. Love has many forms of manifesting itself, sometimes through protection, sometimes through sacrifice, sometimes through small daily miracles that we do not always understand. But always, always, love finds its way back home. Take care of each other, protect yourselves, love each other, and always remember that family is not just a matter of blood, it's choice, it's care, it's being present even when the world seems to crumble. With all my eternal love, Clara. When Noah finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Little Clara, as if sensing the importance of the moment, opened her eyes, those same brown eyes that seemed to carry within them the wisdom of all the Claras who came before. She knew, whispered Sarah, looking at her daughter with infinite love. She knew that one day we would all be here. Mom always knew things, said Alex softly, reaching out to touch his little sister. She told me once that love is like water. It always finds a way. Helena approached the bed, her eyes fixed on little Clara. She has the same eyes, she said with a choked voice, the same eyes as my sister. Noah, who had remained silent after the reading, finally spoke. Clara gave us more than just a letter. She gave us a family that transcends blood, time, and even death itself. Mrs. Mercedes and Mrs. Matilda exchanged emotional glances, silent witnesses of how love had finally found its way back home. That afternoon, when Sarah was finally discharged from the hospital, the Aguirre mansion awaited her differently than when she had first entered it months ago. It was no longer a cold and silent house, marked by pain and absence. Now it was truly a home, warmed by the love of a family that fate had reunited in mysterious and perfect ways. In the room prepared for Clara, next to Alex's, a delicate mobile danced with the breeze. On it, small, colorful dragons flew in circles, protecting each other, exactly like in Alex's drawings. And so, as the sun set on that extraordinary day, the family gathered in the living room, watched Alex show his latest drawings to his little sister, who slept peacefully. Sarah, nestled on the sofa between Noah and Helena, finally felt that she was home, because sometimes fate takes us down winding paths only to bring us exactly where we should be. And sometimes the most beautiful stories are those written not with ink, but with love, sacrifice, and the certainty that, in the end, all circles are completed.